The hidden architecture beneath the crust. Everything we see on Earth is supported by something unseen. Mountains, oceans, and continents rest on structures we never touch. And those structures decide whether the planet holds together. By the time Earth learned patience, its surface stability depended on architecture buried far below. This matters because what keeps a planet alive is not only what happens on top, but how forces are arranged beneath it. Earth's endurance came from a framework that guided motion instead of resisting it. The surface, for all its visible drama, is fundamentally a dependent system, shaped and sustained by processes that operate entirely out of sight. Beneath the crust, the mantle was no longer chaotic. Heat moved through organized convection cells that followed long-lived pathways, redistributing energy across the planet instead of concentrating it in destructive bursts. These currents determined where plates moved, where mountains formed, and where oceans opened. The surface was obeying a deeper design. The convective patterns in the mantle had stabilized into configurations that persisted across hundreds of millions of years, creating a predictable framework within which surface processes could operate with some degree of continuity. Even deeper, the core maintained a steady rhythm. Its motion sustained a magnetic field, shielding the planet from solar erosion and preserving the atmosphere that life depended on. This invisible engine worked continuously, indifferent to surface drama, yet essential to every breath taken above it. The dynamo process in the outer core converted thermal and compositional convection into a planetary-scale magnetic shield, a process that depended entirely on the gravitational and thermal organization achieved during earlier phases of the planet's development. This hidden architecture created boundaries. Some regions absorbed stress, others released it. Fault lines formed where movement was allowed, while vast areas remained stable for millions of years. Earth was not uniform. It was engineered by imbalance. The distribution of stress across the planet's interior followed patterns determined by mantle flow, creating zones of activity and zones of quiescence that gave the surface its characteristic mosaic of stable cratons and dynamic plate boundaries. The surface could change because the foundation endured. The planet could move because something held it together. What lay beneath the crust was not chaos. It was structure, and that structure would soon prepare Earth for its final transformation. This hidden structure did more than support motion. It filtered it. Forces rising from deep within the planet encountered layers that redirected, delayed, or diffused their impact before reaching the surface. Energy that once erupted violently now traveled through a maze of pathways that softened its arrival, preserving continuity above. The mantle acted as a thermal and mechanical buffer, transforming the raw energy of the deep interior into the modulated forces that drove plate tectonics at the surface. The mantle's convection cells acted like slow gears, translating immense heat into manageable movement. Plates responded to these currents in predictable ways, sliding, colliding, or separating along boundaries that rarely shifted location. This consistency allowed landscapes to evolve gradually instead of being rewritten unpredictably. The persistence of these boundaries over geological time meant that the surface could develop long-term features, mountain ranges, ocean basins, continental interiors, that accumulated complexity precisely because the forces shaping them remained stable. Below even that, the core's behavior remained remarkably steady. Its constant motion maintained a magnetic field without interruption, protecting the atmosphere across billions of years. Even when surface conditions shifted dramatically, this deep engine continued without pause, anchoring the planet's long-term stability. The core's independence from surface events was itself a form of resilience, ensuring that the planet's most essential protective mechanism could not be disrupted by the kind of crises that periodically affected the crust and atmosphere. The build-up toward this moment reveals how Earth learned to compartmentalize stress. Pressure did not vanish. It was assigned roles. Some layers moved, others resisted. Each depth operated on its own timescale, preventing synchronized failure. Earth had learned how to avoid cascading collapse. The separation of timescales between core, mantle, and crust meant that a disruption at one level could be absorbed without propagating to the others, a form of structural resilience that no single layer could have achieved on its own. This architecture also created memory. Past events shaped present behavior by altering deep structures that persisted long after surface evidence eroded away. The planet carried its history not just in rocks above ground, but in patterns of motion below it. Mantle flow patterns recorded the thermal and compositional history of billions of years, influencing where future volcanic activity would concentrate and how plates would continue to interact. Earth's strength was not rigidity. It was organization. And that organization quietly determined how far the planet could go without breaking. As this deep architecture matured, it began shaping the future more than any single surface event ever could. The arrangement of layers, currents, and boundaries dictated how Earth would respond to stress long before that stress appeared. What seemed like reaction at the surface was often decision made deep below. The surface responded to forces that had been organized, filtered, and modulated by structures it could not see and processes it could not directly influence. This buildup marked the emotional peak of the hidden world's influence. Earth no longer relied on surface balance alone. Even when climate shifted, seas rose, or life transformed ecosystems, the deep structure maintained continuity. The planet could bend without folding in on itself because its foundations distributed force intelligently. The deep architecture provided a stabilizing inertia that prevented surface crises from cascading into planetary-scale failures. Mantle pathways guided where supercontinents assembled and broke apart, influencing ocean circulation and climate on timescales far beyond any single species. Core dynamics ensured the magnetic shield remained intact through upheaval, preserving atmosphere and water when they were most vulnerable. The deepest layers were setting limits on catastrophe. They determined not just where disruption occurred, but how severe it could become before the planet's own internal organization absorbed and redirected it. What makes this moment profound is its invisibility. Nothing dramatic announced that Earth had become internally reliable. There was no signal in the sky or on the ground. The change lived entirely below perception, expressed only through endurance. The hidden architecture declares existence only through its effects, through the survival of atmospheres, the persistence of oceans, and the continuity of surfaces that by all rights should have been destroyed by the energy contained beneath them. Earth had become a planet whose most important decisions were made out of sight, and that quiet control would determine whether the surface could ever host observers at all. The climax of Earth's hidden architecture was not a moment of stillness, but of trust. The surface no longer needed to absorb every shock alone. Forces could rise, shift, and dissipate through deep structures that protected continuity above. The planet had built a foundation capable of carrying complexity. That foundation was invisible, silent, and continuous, working without interruption across the entire span of Earth's geological history. The resolution lies in what this foundation made possible. Stable continents could endure long enough for ecosystems to mature. Oceans could circulate without losing their chemistry. Atmosphere could persist without being stripped away. Earth's surface gained freedom because its interior took responsibility. The independence of the surface to develop complexity was directly enabled by the dependability of the structures beneath it. This deep organization did not remove risk. It reframed it. Catastrophe became local rather than global. Change became layered rather than absolute. Earth could suffer damage without losing function because its most important systems were protected beneath the surface. What makes this achievement remarkable is how rarely it occurs. Many worlds fracture internally, losing atmosphere or freezing into stagnation. Earth endured because it built an internal architecture that could adapt, redistribute, and recover across deep time. The planet's strength was never what we could see. It was what we stood on without noticing. Subscribe to join the journey. The